What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from SBMTG on the YouTube.com down there. You know by now, we like magic. Today, as you probably know this by now too, got a deck tech for you. You saw the title. We're doing mono green Stompy this evening. For those unfamiliar with the term Stompy, I don't blame you. The deck hasn't been a thing since like 2004, something like that. Like, the deck came in around like the late 90s, 97, 98, and stuck around for a little while in various forms and gathered a pretty large fan base. And ever since then, people are wondering, when is Stompy coming back? I don't know if it's the format for it right now, but we do have a lot of really, really good green cards, super obviously. Just a couple of months ago, green was far and away the best color in the format. And Stompy is usually a sort of aggro, sort of mid-range deck. It goes relatively high up the curve to, 4 or 5 sometimes. But it's very, very heavily creature-based. It does what green does best. It just plays basically above-curve creatures every turn and bashes face. We're playing 29 creatures to start things off with here. It's a Stompy deck. We want to play a bunch of creatures, and that's what green does best. We've got some pretty sweet creatures in green, starting with Prowler, which I'm going to play a 3 of. Because I don't know that I want to top deck this guy really late in the game, although he's not a bad top deck if you can transform him. There's always that. But I don't want to draw him all game long. But Prowler does a lot of good things for us. He's an obviously above curve 1-drop. Anytime you get a 2-power 1-drop, that is considered a very good deal. Not only that, but like I've already mentioned, later on in the game, this guy gets like pretty big on his own. That's not bad. And because it does a couple of good things in this format right now. Because we're in a weird format. There's a lot of aggro, and there's a lot of control. And we're sort of in a tug of war right now. We don't know. Even after the Pro Tour, 2 control decks in the finals. But there were, 3 or 4 other aggro decks in the finals too. So I don't think anybody's going to stop playing aggro anytime soon. My point here is that Prowler is actually not a bad card against either strategy. Against control, puts us on the board early. We can start digging in damage. That's good against control. Getting on the board as early as possible. Very nice, but against these aggro decks, this can block and at least trade with a Toolcraft Exemplar that has its bonus. I think there is something to be said for that. We can block Toolcraft Exemplar, we can obviously block Thraben Inspector and trade. Not a great trade, but we can. So I don't think that Prowler is too bad from both a defensive and offensive perspective, depending on what you're playing against. On the 2-drops, I'll just start with a 4 of Sylvan Advocate here. It's not the card that it once was, and we're not playing like person lands, man lands in this deck at all. So it kind of loses a little bit of its normal function, but at the same time, it's still like technically the most above curve creature that we can play at 2-drop in a green deck. 2/3 for 2 mana. Freaking great deal right now. And there is the problem that it trades with Toolcraft Exemplar. We actually don't want it to do that. We don't want to trade our 2-drop for a 1-drop. But at the same time, in these colors, 2 mana for a 2/3 is the absolute best deal we're going to get as far as sheer power and toughness. And a little bit later in the game, this gets really, really good. So yeah, I'll play all 4 copies. I'm going to play 3 copies of Duskwatch Recruiter here, and you could go for the full playset, but I don't know that it's quite the right time. This card is very good if you can resolve it against control decks, and if it sticks around for more than a turn or 2 against those decks, and it's getting you really good card advantage. So there is that. I feel like it's decent against control, but they can remove it fairly easily, so there's that too. And against aggro, I feel like the card is fairly slow. But that being said, I think Duskwatch Recruiter is still a good card. It's at least on curve, 2 mana 2/2. That can get bigger for just your 2 mana investment. That's cool. Can make all your creatures cost less, can get you card advantage. I just don't see any reason not to play it in a deck with 29 creatures. You're pretty likely to hit something when you use his ability. While we're talking about werewolves, I'll go ahead and tell you, we're playing a 2 of Lambholt Pacifist in this deck, and I would put more in there. I just don't think there's any room in the current build. I'd rather play the number of cards that I'm playing for all the other cards. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to cut anything to add more pacifists, but I do ultimately want to play some pacifists. It's very easy for us to get a creature power 4 or greater. She can attack very easily. When she flips, obviously, she becomes basically a 4 power thing that you invested 2 mana into. That's so good, especially in a Stompy deck. That's exactly what it wants, but it also wants its creatures to be able to attack as soon as possible. I said Sylvan Advocate was technically the most above curve creature we can play at 2 mana. Actually, this is, honestly, a 2 mana 3/3 that has the potential to have 4 power. is insane. You know, and again, I'd like to play more of this. I just feel like I would rather maintain the number of slots I have for all the other cards in the deck. I'd like to find more space, I just can't. Last 2-drop here, a 4-of Servant of the Conduit, and there are multiple reasons for this. Now we could instead play Deathcap Cultivator or Ovenwall Captive here. There's other ramp that we could play, obviously. But I like that this is a 2/2. 2 toughness is pretty nice. Especially like against like Thraben Inspector, that actually matters. You know, some people are still playing Bomat Courier. That 1 toughness matters a lot. We're playing a Bristling Hydra in the deck, so there is the off chance that even if you don't use this for ramp, you can play 2 of them and have enough to give the Hydra hexproof and a +1/+1 counter, so that's important as well. And in that situation, you can actually still use one of the energy to tap your conduit once, so there's that. But it's mostly because of that energy synergy is why I'm playing it in the deck, but also because it's the meatiest ramper that we can play right now. And I do think that ramp is somewhat important, you know, against the control decks. You want to play your big stuff before they can really have a great response to it. And sure, like even if you get the ramp and then you end up playing Gear Hulk on turn 4, they can still Void Shatter that. That can be a problem. But we're still a turn ahead of where we should be if we have a conduit out. And that is invaluable against not only control decks, but also aggro decks, because aggro decks will be looking to kill us by turn 4. So if we can get a little bit of ramp and start playing higher, you know, better stuff than we should be playing on any given turn, then that can really also help out against aggro, put some big stuff out to sort of halt the board and swing the game back in your favor. So I think it's important that we play ramp. I just don't want to go crazy and play like 8 or 10 rampers. I think 4 Servant is enough. I'm going to play a 3-of Tireless Tracker. It's the only 3-drop in the deck. I'd really like to fill this out a little bit more, but I don't know that I want to play more trackers. It's not as good as it used to be either. It's like Sylvan Advocate. Especially with something like Smuggler's Copter running around, you know. Smuggler's Copter is a serious problem right now in the format. And when they have a 2-drop flyer that can eat your 3-drop, I just don't know how much I like that at all. And the same thing goes with Sylvan Advocate. You know, it trades with a 1-drop. That's not ideal either. So right now, you know, with Smuggler's Copter and Exemplar running around, it's hard to play things that are above curve because those cards are so in and of themselves above curve. That being said, even though I do think Tracker's a little bit weaker than it used to be, and some of these other cards too, I don't think that it's a bad card, especially if you can draw the game out a little bit, you know, get a couple of counters on it, sack a couple of clues, draw some cards. I mean, it's obviously a fantastic mid-range card, and we need something at 3 mana to fill out the curve. Although there's other stuff we can do, you know, on turn 3 we can always play a 2-drop and hold up 1 mana for Blossoming Defense. That can also be really important to have that play. So, you know, we technically have other stuff we can do on turn 3, but this is the only 3-drop, and if you force me into playing a green 3-drop, it would be Tireless Tracker. Duh. Mentioned this a second ago, we're playing a whole playset of Bristling Hydra because I want to go pretty high in the Stompy deck, especially considering that we're playing some ramp. You know, we can get Bristling Hydra on turn 3, we can get Verder's Gear Hulk on turn 4, and a turn 3 Bristling Hydra is very nice, you know. I really like to look at this as though it just has 4 toughness. In that case, yeah, it can die to, say, Grasp of Darkness. Sometimes, you know, the turn after you use the hexproof thing on it. But that being said, the ability in this format to give a creature hexproof at instant speed is incredibly desirable against all these control decks, you know. And it's also worth noting that this will put it over Radiant Flames. If you give it the 1 counter, and hexproof, that puts it over Radiant Flames. Flames will still do 3 damage to it. Flames doesn't care about the hexproof, but it'll still be bigger than Radiant Flames can kill. So that is also very important right now. Really like Hydra against all these control decks that pack, you know, 20 instant speed, you know, removal pieces. So something like Bristling Hydra seems like really bonkers to me right now because it gets around all of that at least once, sometimes forces a 2-for-1, which is really nice no matter which way you slice it. So against these control decks, if you can resolve a Bristling Hydra, then you are doing pretty well from my perspective. On to the 5-drops, a whole playset of a 5-drop too. Again, we've got the ramp, we'll be okay. We're going to play 4 copies of Verder's Gear Hulk because it's really, when you think about it, kind of the entire reason to build this deck. You know, Verder's Gear Hulk is a good one. It's not the best Gear Hulk like a lot of people thought, but it's still very solid. The best thing about this Gear Hulk is that, and you know, they can void shatter it, that sucks. But if it stays out, if it enters the battlefield at all, if you resolve this card, then you will put 4 power onto the battlefield. So even, you know, basically 8 power onto the battlefield. So even if they kill the Gear Hulk, then you've still gotten 4 power worth of value out of this thing. And that can be very important, again, in a format that's got so much instant speed removal. No matter what you choose to do with the board, it's going to be very impactful. So love this card. Even if you resolve it and it dies the next turn, it has still done a lot of work for you. So I'm going to play all 4 copies. And to finish off the creatures, I'm going to play a 2-of Decimator of Provinces. Another one of the big reasons to play the deck, and I'd like to bump this up to 3. I just don't know that it's a sound idea to do that. Especially, you know, we've got some advantage in the deck. We got Tireless Tracker, we got Duskwatch Recruiter, so there are ways that we can draw into this, even though we're only playing 2 copies. But Decimator is a game-ending card, and you don't even have to resolve it. It's cast triggers. Against these decks that play Void Shatter, and yeah, you have to worry about summary dismissal. Usually after game 1, but mostly they're going to be packing 2 and 3 of Void Shatter, and this can, in a lot of ways, get around that as long as you have a fairly developed board at the time. This is basically our overrun effect. You know, a lot of Stompy decks are going to want something like this, something just in the game as soon as we, in this case, cast it. We don't even have to resolve it. That's so good right now. So Decimator I want to make some room for in the deck. He's something just like Verder's Gear Hulk, and is especially good after a Verder's Gear Hulk. Just want to point that out. But just like Gear Hulk, you know, he can turn a relatively small board into Alpha Strike, like, immediately. So yeah, we'll play a couple of him. We're playing 4 vehicles in the deck. Can you guess what they are? They're 4 Smuggler's Copter. This is a competitive deck, and you gotta, I mean, especially in something like this with 29 creatures, we're relatively low in the curve, you gotta play Smuggler's Copter, and I know that we're in danger of playing a lot of 2-drops here, sort of clogging up with 2-drops. But the good thing about that is a lot of our 2-drops are above curve, so even if we play 2-drop on turn 2, 2-drop on turn 3, there's a pretty good chance that we're still beating their turn 3 play with a Sylvan Advocate or a Smuggler's Copter. You know, that can easily happen. And again, there's always holding up mana for Blossoming Defense, which can be very important on turn 3 with all the removal in the format right now. And by the way, Smuggler's Copter is another thing that can give us card advantage, or at least card selection. So with Duskwatch Recruiter and Tireless Tracker and Smuggler's Copter, we are drawing more cards than the average aggro deck. And the only thing in the deck that isn't either a creature or like basically a creature, like Smuggler's Copter, is a 3-of Blossoming Defense, which I brought up a bunch of times already in this video. This card is really good. This card is fan-freaking-tastic, and I could definitely see it being a playset. I've said that about a bunch of things. I could see more copies. So, in a way, you know, I keep saying I could see 4 copies of this or 3 copies of that instead of what I've already got in here. And that means that Stompy actually has a bevy of options at its disposal right now. You know, you can see that I've had to sort of finagle this deck. And in a second, I'll get to all the stuff I didn't play. And there's a ton of options I didn't play. So this is kind of a wide open deck right now. And I don't know how well it stands up to a lot of the things in the format, but we do have options against both aggro and control. We can play in sort of a versatile way against those 2 different kinds of decks that dominate the format right now. So that's not bad either. And Blossoming Defense goes a long way into playing against both kinds of decks, because Blossoming Defense can, not only against aggro, can it help us win combat situations against creatures we otherwise wouldn't. At instant speed, that's good. But these aggro decks also will play Harness Lightning and sometimes Declaration in Stone, so it's good against that as well. And obviously the control decks that play 20 some odd removal pieces, Blossoming Defense is also insanely good. It's like having a negate that makes your creature do more combat damage. That's very good. Here's the mana base for you. 24 lands, all of them forests and a Westvale Abbey. I figured I'd throw in the Abbey because 29 creatures and Smuggler's Copter, you know, we got room for Westvale Abbey. You can come on in. Here's the sideboard right here, and you'd be surprised by the options that we have in a mono green sideboard right now. Honestly, there's a lot of stuff we could play. There's stuff I didn't play that might still go in there. But right now, Natural State, I think, is a no-brainer against Smuggler's Copter. All 4 copies of that, let's do that. I think that's a good starting point. Aside from that, we'll fill out the playset of Blossoming Defense against the control decks. Larger Than Life can also be decent against the control decks if you can resolve it. Get a guy in for a bunch of damage all at one time and really cut the clock for them. That's important. And it's very good with Smuggler's Copter, but Larger Than Life and Smuggler's Copter. Super sweet 7/7 Trample Copter that draws you a card. Yeah, yes. There's also Plummet in there, which is very good against Smuggler's Copter. Same with Root Out. A lot of these can just kill Smuggler's Copter. But Root Out can also kill like Gear Hulk, Torrential Gear Hulk, serious problem right now. So there's that as well. It can kill Sky Sovereigns and Fleet Wheel Cruisers, so Root Out gives you a little bit more play when it comes to destroying artifacts. And then Nissa, Vital Force, let's talk about her for just a second here. She was in the main deck, but she got cut because she's abysmal against aggro. She's just not great against aggro at all. You know, for 5, I'd just much rather play Gearhulk against those decks. But against Control, if you can resolve her, which I've already said like a million times in this video, but we're back to the kind of Magic where you have to say that. You know, if you can resolve a Vital Force against Control, it is really freaking good. Like, no joke either. You know, the first ability cuts the clock to 4 turns for them. It's a lot like Gideon in that way. The second ability is great against all of their removal because you can just get your guys back. That's fantastic. It's card advantage. And then that third ability, if you can get that ultimate off, which is obviously not super hard to get her ultimate off, then you can win the card advantage war, and that is incredibly important against Control. So once resolved against Control, this thing is in freaking sane, and it's easy to keep out in a lot of ways. You know, Control's not going to pressure it too much with creatures, obviously, but also the 2 Control decks that were in the finals, they really don't have that much of Pro Tour Kaladesh, by the way. They don't really have that much help against Planeswalkers, you know? Like the Jeskai deck has like 1 Quarantine Field against Planeswalkers, that's about it, you know? The Grixis deck doesn't play Ruinous Path because it wants to maximize its plan with Torrential Gearhulk. So there's really not, I mean, they're not naked against Planeswalkers, but they're not as equipped against Planeswalkers as you'd think they would be. So if you can resolve a Vital Force, like, that goes a long way towards you winning. It's very good. Let's quickly, before we go to the power rankings, sort of go over a couple cards I didn't play, or maybe that I cut from the deck and why. Worldbreaker, I was playing a 2 of. I think Worldbreaker is a very good card right now because artifacts are such a thing, you know? But at the same time, I didn't want to basically play a ramp deck, you know? I feel like we need 4 to 6 more cards that ramp us in order to efficiently play this and, you know, reliably get it on the board every game. So I just don't know about Worldbreaker in this deck specifically. Fleet Wheel Cruiser also I'm a little awkward on right now. I'm slightly cold on Fleet Wheel Cruiser because every deck packs removal that can kill it, like Harness Lightning in the aggro decks, and then Control obviously has a million cards that can kill it. A lot of times against Control it'll be hard to resolve. You know, I was just talking about that with Nissa. So I don't know how I feel about Fleet Wheel Cruiser right now, to be honest with you. Oath of Nissa was in the deck, but I want to maximize the amount of creatures that we're playing. We have a fair amount of card advantage anyway. So I'm just not, I don't know about Oath right now. Same thing with Traverse the Uvenwald. We just weren't ever getting Delirium, so it was useless. I wanted to play Ovia Pashiri in the deck, but she's also slightly awkward. And I don't think very good right now. Even if you do manage to resolve her against Control deck on turn 1, then they've got sweepers, you know, they've got removal for days, like a Galvanic Bombardment, just 1 copy kills it, you know. So I don't know about Ovia right now, but she's tempting at least. And then the last thing I want to talk about is Cryptolith Rite. When I first built the deck, I had a plan where I was going to play like 16 1-drops, a bunch of ramping 2-drops, and then Verdurous Gearhulk and Cryptolith Rite. That was the whole idea, you know, just like a bunch of tiny creatures, and then on turn 4 or 3 or 4, the plan is to drop a Verdurous Gearhulk and just make our board like huge all of a sudden very early in the game. But that just wasn't working consistently the way I wanted it to, and it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. Here are your power rankings right here. Final score Nintendo 64, which is, you know, pretty good. We always say that mid-60s is at least a decent score. And it's got pros and cons against both aggro and Control, you know. It's got good plays against aggro decks. It's got decent plays against Control decks. But being objective here, you know, Control, a lot of very low to the ground aggro decks, like the ones that play Reckless Bushwhacker, can blow you out before you get a really good board presence going, before you can turn the corner. And Control decks, if you start playing their game, you know, if you get to turn 8, 9 and you're still playing a game against Control, like, you don't scoop or anything, but like the likelihood of you winning that game is drastically low. So, dramatically low. But that being said, if we can hit that sweet spot of, you know, mid-game promise and really fill out our board and win by turn 6, that can and does happen on a relatively reliable basis. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not like bashing on the deck. The deck is not bad or anything. I'm just being realistic about the problems that the deck has. That's pretty much all I've got for now. Let me know how you felt about this one down there in the comments. Are you willing to try it out, maybe even just on X-Mage or something, and let me know what your results are. I'd be really interested in hearing that. Because I've had sort of mixed results. If you can't tell by the way I'm talking about the deck, I've had mixed results. I'm probably about 500 with this deck. You know, I've won about as many as I've lost playing with this deck. So it does have its foibles, but it also has its things you can get excited about. So let me know how you felt about this in the comments section. And then like the content if you like the content, sub if you're new, and all that stuff, all the YouTube things. Very important to me that you do it. I know I'm glossing over it, but please do them. But as usual, I hope you haven't left yet. I know a lot of people just check out and click away as soon as the YouTuber starts doing the like, share stuff. But anyway, what are we doing next time? That's also very important. Well, next time, budget deck. It's budget's turn. And in light of recent events at the Pro Tour, I think I'm going to go ahead and push blue-black control up the calendar here. So blue-black budget control coming up next time. Look out for that. And I will see you guys later. I'm Deb from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.